Welcome to the Business of Family, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and opportunities of family businesses. I'm your host, Tammy Buss, and I'm a family business survivor, and I'm also a family business advisor. In this show, we'll be talking with family business leaders and experts to bring you insights and inspiration so you too can survive your family business journey. Whether you're a founder, a successor, a professional, or just curious about family business, this podcast is for you. So today our guest is President and CBO, Chief Bargain Officer of the Bargains Group, Jody Steinhauer, the winner of the Canadian Women Entrepreneur of the Year Award, Canada's Top 40 Under 40, and several other notable awards. Jody has grown the Bargains Group from her apartment living room to a multi-million-dollar a year business. Pioneering her belief of giving back makes great business sense, Jody is a tireless NFP advocate and the founder, CEO of the charity Engage and Change. Engage and Change provides survival kits and helps thousands of homeless to survive the extreme weather conditions. And particularly here in Canada, we certainly need that today. Jody's most recent impact initiative is Kits for Cause, a social enterprise dedicated to providing purposeful engagement to groups by matching them with charities through kit packing events, which is where I met you, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But to date, Kits for Cause has engaged over 120,000 employees to deliver over 750,000 kits to over 5,000 charities globally, creating an impact of 11 million worldwide. She's also the award-winning author, contributing to the recent Amazon bestseller, Women of Purpose, Creating a Better World. Honestly, I don't know how she gets all this done. She must have more hours in the day than we do. But I want to welcome you, Jody.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Wow, what an intro. You are one busy woman, aren't you?
Yeah, well, that's why I look like I'm about 100 years old, right?
Well, I think that isn't that old saying, if you want something done, ask a busy woman.
Absolutely. Not a busy person, a busy
No,
woman.
a busy
Remember
woman. I
that.
made a point of that. So
Absolutely.
anyway, I met you last year at a Weeby conference in Toronto. So that's a Women's Business Enterprise Association, and I learned about Kits for Cause. So there's so much to talk about. We really want to talk about Kits for Cause today, but let's go back and start at the beginning because you have so much going on. So tell me about your CBO position. I love that title,
Yeah.
CBO. So tell us about the company that you originally founded back in the 80s.
Yeah. Well, thank you. My background is actually fashion and business and marketing, and I went to school for fashion, and I was in high fashion. I could tell you all sorts of stories. I worked in New York at Guess Jeans, and worked with Bloomingdale's and Saks and all these great people. And I realized back then there was an emptiness and there was a real big void in what I did. It was great. I made lots of money. I made people, but there was just something missing. I couldn't put my finger on it. And I won't go through the whole transition, but I ended up working in the I got hired by the absolute opposite of the high fashion world by a guy who had 30 stores and everything in the store was $10. And I ran his wholesale division. And it was amazing. I loved that thrill of the deal. Grew his company very large, and then he had to go bankrupt, not because of me. I made him all his money because of he made I would say, a male ego. Well, my competitor went out of business, so I'm going to buy them. And I remember saying, "Why would you buy them? They went bankrupt for a reason." And then halfway through the transaction, he said, "Jody, I should have listened to you. You were right." And he said, "I'm going to have to bankrupt our company," because he was so in deep. But he said, "I'm going to open up you in an office next door in the next building. I've already secured the space, but we're probably not going to have any finances to hire warehouse people and like all of that for about 6 months until the cash flow comes in." So I just said, "Great. Maybe I should just put my name on the door because I am the business." And I'm happy to help you. And that's really how I started my company. Everyone said, "What was your vision of being an entrepreneur and all of that?" I said, there wasn't a vision. It was an opportunity, right? And I always say to everybody, just keep your eyes open. So that's how I started my company. And back then, there wasn't really in Canada, as the United States was a little bit, a discounter was Kmart or
Oh yeah.
Byway in Canada, or Bargain Heralds or Honest Sets. Other than, we didn't have Walmart. We didn't have
Mm.
all these huge TJX, Marshalls, Winners. We didn't have dollar stores. We didn't have all of these things. There's a very different retail landscape. But from my marketing background, I could go into a factory. I could say, what's that there? What's that there? How much? I'll take it all. And I already had the vision of how it would look in a retail store,
Hmm.
what price they could sell it at, how I would merchandise a rack because I had a background in retail. And that's really what I did. So I always say I had the best job in the world. I get to go shopping for a living and make people happy. And I sold stores, and remember, we had no websites back then.
Hmm.
Um, I did it on the phone, if you can imagine, like yellow pages on the
Oh
phone.
yeah.
And,
Been there, done that.
yeah, and it
And
was
not very
so,
many women in the 80s. I
there's
started my
no
first
women.
business in the 80s. There was not a
It
lot
was
of women.
all men. And you know
Yeah.
what? It was interesting. I'm a connector. I love making people happy. So when I call a small store in a small town and they're like, this is amazing, because nobody serviced that main street in a small town. And I made those people a lot of money. All the men were going after the big department stores and the big people. And they would say to me all the time, Jody, what are you wasting your time on all these little people? Meanwhile, not any of them are in business. And they all, I know, and themselves, it's a very small industry. They're like, well, we should have listened to you. And my philosophy was I'd rather have thousands and thousands of smaller clients than 5 or 10 huge clients. And that's kind of how I got into the business. So when he went under it, there was the opportunity. And then I was very fortunate that most of the factories and the clothing, the rag trade was out of Montreal or in downtown Toronto. And I didn't realize I had an unbelievable reputation. Again, it was a very kind of shady industry. And all of these factories and suppliers and presidents, literally, I left this guy on a Friday and my phone rang off the hook all weekend, and all the people heard and they said, Jody, whatever you need, we'll support you. Just go out and sell our stuff and pay us when you get paid. And I was like young 20s. I'm like, oh, okay, thanks. That's so nice. Um, these days we would call that self-financing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and they were shipping me hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of product. And they said, just pay us when you get paid, because I had a real moral compass that people knew that I would never do anything unless, I would not sell anybody if I thought we wouldn't get paid. So that's kind of how I started. And I kept just growing and growing and growing. And I was very frugal. The joke was I had 6 offices over the years. Every single time I shared an office with somebody, and the joke was, don't share an office with Jody because you'll go bankrupt and she'll grow. Everyone went bankrupt who I shared a building with. And then finally, where we are now, 21 years ago, we bought our first piece of real estate, and our business is just blocked. Everyone loves a bargain. I always say
Mhm.
I'm in the happiness business. So it's who doesn't like getting a deal on something? It's that euphoric high when you find a deal. So I figured that's what I am. I'm the chief bargain officer.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that title. Um, so then tell us about that movement. I want to talk more about the business, but I also want to talk about how you got into the charitable work.
Yeah,
I know you
yeah,
have the
great
bargain
question.
side and you did a great job growing your business. But tell me how you got so involved in the charitable
Yeah.
side.
So before I started with this gentleman, there was two moments of my life. We always said those moments that you remember framed your life. So when I was in the high fashion world, I worked down in Toronto. There's a street called Queen Street, and that was the street where it would be like equivalent to New York and like Greenwich Village, where all the cool designers were. And I worked in selling very high fashion. And one day after work, I was going to a baseball game, and my car was parked in an alleyway down at Queen and Portland. And when I went to my car, a man grabbed my ankle and scared the living crap out of
Oh,
me.
hmm.
And I screamed, and he said, ma'am, don't worry. I'm so sorry. I'm just really hungry. Can you help me? And I started to converse with this. Now, most people would have flipped out and run away, but I'm a very curious person. And I asked the question, when's the last time you ate? And I had a lunch. Like I said, Kentucky Fried Chicken was across the street. I went and got him that. And we became friends. Like I brought him breakfast every morning, and he was living in the streets. I called up a shelter. I eventually got him a job in a warehouse and all of that. But what I recognized out of that encounter was this guy could have been my brother. with, or my cousin or my friend with just some really crappy luck.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that was the first thing that got me thinking about, empathy and kindness. And it made, most importantly, it made me feel really good. And that was the what I realized. And then years later, I was volunteering at a youth shelter. And I'll never forget, I came in for my shift and the woman said to me, "Oh, you're the one in the clothing business." And I'm like, "How do you know that?" And she said, "Oh, well, you always wear great scarves and accessories. So we always wait to see what you're wearing." And I said, "Oh, okay, great." And she said, "We need to run an errand. Can you watch the clothing room? We were thrilled you're here." And I'm like, "Sure, what do I do?" And she said, "You give the youth anything they want. There's underwear and track pants, but just give them one. And please just be nice, of course, and treat them with dignity and respect." I said, "Of course." So she puts me in this room. People are walking up. I'm like, "Hey, what's your story? I'm Jody." And they're looking at me like, "Who the heck are you?" And I'm like, "Well," so I started talking to these people and I was like just amazed. And I connected with these kids, right? And I gave them stuff. Well, I look at my watch and I'm like, these women have been gone for 3 hours. I'm supposed to volunteer for an hour. And, I got to get back to work. So they come back. The car's filled with Zeller's bags. So for the Americans and the Zeller's is like Kmart. Okay. I was so excited. They thought I was crazy. They said, "Why are you so excited?" I said, "Because Zeller's is my client and they're horrible. They're rude. They don't pay their bills on time. They're just absolutely dreadful people. So now they have a chance to redeem themselves. I always give everybody a chance. And they've donated all of this stuff. You've got a full car." And they looked at me and said, "We just spent $10,000 at Zeller's. They didn't give us anything. They gave us a 5% discount." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And then I was
Why
I
they're
was
not in business
literally,
anymore.
well, they're not in business, but that is a very typical story. And I remember every time I tell that story, I feel physically sick. And I said to them, "I can't believe that you actually went shopping. I will never donate money to your charity ever again if that's how you're using my money." And they looked at me and said, "Well, where else would we get this stuff?" I said, "Do you know what I do when I'm not volunteering? I have a company called the Bargains Group." And they looked at me and I said, "Let's see what you bought." And then I was physically sick. They unpacked all of the bags. It was toques, gloves, long johns, shampoo, and a couple of socks. It was all from Bargains Group. It was my product.
Mm.
And I eyeballed it and it was about $2,500 I would have sold it for. And they just paid 10 grand. So 4 to 1. So when I told them that next time, if you like this, just call me. I'll deliver it. I'll give you 30 days to pay. You won't have to take 6 hours of social workers' time.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to throw in some donations and help you wherever I can. And these women, literally, their body language was like this. And they said, "Is it stolen?" And I said, "No, that's what I do." Because there wasn't an industry of what I do. There still isn't an industry of what I do. So that's how I got hooked. And I thought, that's impact. Like I can help a shelter multiply their budget by 4 times and help. And these days, it's even more critical because we
Mm-hmm.
all know how bad it is for charities. I mean, this morning alone, I have 3 charities across the country that have told me they're having to close programs down and lay people off. It's horrific. So I thought, isn't this really cool? How much I can help. And the more they started calling me and they started telling me, and I started I always say I got my PhD on the street. And that's how I started helping the poor. But then I was 2 decades, I won all of these awards and I couldn't understand, why are you giving me an award? I'm just helping people. Doesn't everybody do that? But I didn't realize not everybody did that 30 years ago.
Mm.
And fast forward about 8 or 9 years ago, there was a conference on corporate social responsibility. It became very, very in vogue. Every consultant was, doing that. And then they all started calling me. And after this conference, we tracked it. We got 500 corporations calling and emailing us, asking for some kind of group volunteer team building activity that they could do with their staff, and they were frustrated. They were panicking. I'm like, why are you so stressed out? They said, because we're calling charities and nobody's calling us back, and we're emailing them. And we just want to bring, 200 people to volunteer for 2 hours. And I'm like, you can't volunteer at a homeless shelter for what are
Yeah.
you talking about? They're not calling you back because they're dealing with vulnerable people. They're not chimpanzees in a zoo. And they said, well, they all told us to call you. Can you help? Because remember, I had a charity.
Yes.
So I
Right.
asked them two really important questions. Do you have a charity or a cause that you're passionate about? And then I said, do you have a budget? And we tracked these 500 calls in 83 days. 499 of them had a budget. So the joke was I was on Match.com at the time. And like every good bootstrapped entrepreneur, I said, this is amazing. I'm going to take Match.com and knock it off. And I'm going to take my charity Engage and Change because we're the most amazing kit packing company and organization in the world. And I'm going to merge them, but we're going to build it into a social enterprise because this is not a Canadian or a North American problem. This
No.
is a global problem. And I know how to solve it. So we called it Kits for a Cause, and it's blown up all around the world. And it's like a startup in an old woman's company, but it's where I spend most of my time. And to give you ideas of who I serve, every Fortune 500 company, um, Amazon. I had 4 calls in the last 48 hours from Amazon, and I laugh. I'm like, "You're calling me?" They said, "Jody, we can't do what you do." Right?
Yeah.
So it's really, really rewarding because we don't just our job, we do it for free. We consult, we tell people how, we match people up, and we make a living because I have people who need to make a living by providing them all the product. But remember, I own the bargains group, so it's all
Right.
wholesale. So it kind of just all fell into place, just like life something does. And the more I do, the more the world calls out. And the world's really broken. So it's a really great feeling to be able to wake up every day and just know that, you're making an impact, whether it be a disaster kit for someone in the fires of LA or,
Hmm.
a clean pair of underwear and socks and hygiene products for a woman fleeing violence or refugee. I mean, there's no shortage sadly, of causes these days.
No. So describe to me a little bit about how these employees, because those 200 employees who can't
Yeah,
serve in a shelter. So explain for our listeners what that means. So what
sure.
can you do for that company that has these 200 employees
Yeah.
who want to volunteer? How does
Yeah,
Kits for Cause merge?
200, 20, 200, or 10,000. We get every number. There's no number. So basically, the great news is this is a good story. Companies and groups want to help. I call it engaged philanthropy. The bad news is companies don't want to just write checks and give charities
No.
money, and charities desperately need money. So one of the myths or the elephant in the room was that a company thought, and I had two of them today, they could call up somebody and say, we've chosen you, Mr. Charity, and we would like to bring our employees over next Thursday to volunteer for 4 hours. What time should we show up? So I would say to them, well, what's your budget? And they would say, oh, well, we don't have any. We're going to give you volunteer hours. So it's very uncomfortable for a charity to say nicely, we're really busy. We have nothing for you to do. We don't have a space. We're dealing with vulnerable people. We can't expose them to you. Can you imagine in a women's shelter having a bunch of, businessmen come in and take a tour and look around? It's not
Yeah.
acceptable. But they were too afraid of saying no. Charities are too afraid of saying no because they're terrified there's not going to be a check that comes with the visit
Hmm.
until they realize the ones who don't pay aren't writing you a check. So don't even kid yourself. So we recognize that. When they call us, we firstly are very truthful for them and say, what's your budget? If they say we don't have a budget, I will respectfully shame them and tell them that's not socially acceptable. How do you expect a social worker and a group of people to entertain you guys? Are you getting paid while you go on this field trip? And they say, well, of course. I said, well, they're not getting paid. So how do you expect them to do that? You got to make a financial contribution. So that attitude is slightly changing. But we say to them, there's a mathematical, where I'm a business person, there's a mathematical formula. So we figure out how many people they've got. What are they trying to accomplish? Sometimes it's a drop in, it's the a meet and greet, it's the beginning of a conference, a Christmas party. There's every kind of gathering. So we really want to understand what they're trying to accomplish, how long they want to engage their employees for. Do they have a charity or cause? If they don't, I always try and bring it back to business and say, well, you're a tech company. So how about, financial literacy, or you're a pharma company? Why don't we help some of the hospitals with some patient comfort kits, or Ronald McDonald House? So we're always trying to match up. Once we've got that kind of figured out, we have to figure out kind of a budget per person. Okay. What the configuration of the event's going to be, because there's about 6 different configurations that are most popular. And then we go in and connect with the charity and find out exactly what they need in real time, because we're creating an activity and an experience. We're not just doing stuff. So our job is an engagement expert. So we have to engage the people. So we have this amazing process, and nobody would ever do. Now remember, the charities are our clients, so we can get to them in seconds. You can't get to a charity. So they'll reach out because they know when we call, it's going to be great for them. They're going to get a bunch of donations. They tell us, we orchestrate all the donations. We arrange for the charity to speak and have like a real raw fireside chat with the people where they can ask questions and they can really, really learn for a specific amount of time. They pack the kits. We have these amazing cards, kits for cause cards, messages of hope. We arrange, it is a well-oiled machine, and we make it fun, super easy, and massively impactful. And we tell the companies how to take, get the amount of things, take the picture, do a video, play some music. There's a million nuances. We consult with them as many times as they want. We prepare them signage and toolkits with their logos and the charity logos. We do it all for free. That's our give back. The only thing they're charged for is the items that go into the kit. But again, they're usually wholesale.
Right.
And we also have a program called the Full Circle Donation Program, where we have warehouses of free donations. So if companies have things that they don't want to put in landfill, they can call me. And if it's value, we will upcycle it and we give it away for free. So every kit pack gets one item free with every single kit. And then we connect them with the charity, tell them from an engagement model how to deliver it to the charity. And then we say to them, when are you going to do this again? And the great thing in business now, it used to be just at the holiday time, but many, many, many companies are calling it we just did one today, the Amazon Kits for a Cause program. And they're doing it monthly or even quarterly. And they're allowing their employees to tell them what charities are important to them.
Right.
And we're even now having HR departments offer this as an employee benefit. We have this program at the company. If you and your church or your religious institution or your family would like to do a Kits for a Cause, because you're an employee of ours, we will hook you up with Kits for a Cause and you can do it too.
Well, that's amazing. So, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up family businesses, because as a family business advisor, I want to talk about the succession plan. So, you
Right.
have these great companies and these great organizations. So, is this a family business? Do you have family in the business? What is your sort of succession plan? And have you thought that out? Because I'm sure that all the companies that you work with and the charities that you supply kits to are going to say, what happens if Jody's not here?
Yeah, they've been asking me that. So interesting. So my very first employee part-time was my stepmother, and she was my first employee. And then my father retired. He came on board for about a decade. He was my controller. And then recently, my daughter joined us. Now, my kids have always worked in the business, between school and things like that. And ironically, a conversation was, I have this amazing business and none of my kids are looking at coming in. And I don't believe in bringing them in if they don't want to, right?
Right.
But my husband and I, he also has his own business and it's a family business. And we always say, do our kids really understand how tough it is to make a living and how lucky you are to have like this business? But I always said to my kids, just to let you know, you're not getting anything. You're buying it from me because I want to retire. So,
Right.
one of my kids is graduating and be an accountant. And he's like, Mom, I'm not really sure, but I think I should. He got a great job with Deloitte. And he said, I think I should work 4 or 5 years and really figure it out. And I said, you'll figure it out and you'll see how much you can make. And then you'll come talk to me. But my daughter joined us 3 weeks ago.
Oh, amazing.
And she said to me, I want to go out and have 4 or 5 jobs first because I don't want to work for you because I have to. I want to work for you because I want to. So she's learning. She went to her first trade show and she's in our promotional products division. She's very creative. But during COVID, my kids were all here. We were shipping COVID supplies coast to coast, so it was all hands on deck. So my succession plan, I would love for some of my family to come in. And I have three step kids and two kids, but only if they were really passionate about it because I'm really helping vulnerable people.
Right.
And I get asked all the time for my business to be purchased, but I
Yeah.
would never sell unless it was to a very altruistic person who is going to really consciously care about my clients because I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing this because I love helping people, but
Right.
I figured out a way of making a good living at the same
Making
time,
money.
you know?
So I want to take just a step back of something you said about you and your husband saying that the kids realize how hard it is. But I got to tell you, as first generation business owners and founders, and again, you start the business because, like you and me in our 20s, it's like because you need to pay the bills, right? You didn't
Right,
start out to be, where you are today. So we
right.
tend not to really talk about those opportunities with our kids, and all we remember is the hard work it took to get to where we are today. And we do
Yeah,
say to our kids, "Oh, it's a lot of work," but you spent 40 years building this business.
right. Yeah,
And again, we don't really tend to, as a first generation family owner, founder, really talk about the opportunities. And, it's like, are you interested in the business? Well, no, I'm not. I'm an accountant, so no. But as my role as a family business advisor is to talk to the family and to get them to understand the differences between a family, the business, and the ownership and what the opportunities might be moving forward. So it's not just a one and done. They're not interested. It's
right,
talking about where the opportunities are. And they don't have to be you. They don't have to grow the business the way you did. They might
right.
come at it with a different lens saying, this is another adjacent business that I'd love to see that really I'm passionate about expanding what I'm currently doing. So I just want to say that, you know, to the listeners, it's not if your kids want to or not coming, don't want to come in. It's understand the opportunities and realizing that the hard work was in the first 40 years. Now you've got a
Yeah.
baseline. And if you can maintain it and look after keeping the culture the same and looking at your suppliers and your people that you're working with, that there's more opportunities. And I don't think we tend to focus on that as first generation.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting you said that because like I said, my husband has a business. Him and his brothers are partners, ironically, about the same 37 years. And, between them, there's, seven kids. And we always say, do our kids not realize how hard it is to make six figures these days? And buying a house, especially in a real estate market like Toronto, and I remember saying, well, you know what? Let them go work 4 or 5 years,
Yeah.
and let them kind of look and say, I still can't buy a house, right?
Right.
And it may be something interesting. So my daughter, for example, her name is Spencer. Uh, she is extremely creative and she's an incredible like salesperson. Not even she doesn't even know she's an incredible salesperson. She just connects with people. I wonder where she got that from. And but she's very creative. But she loves traveling and going here. She's a going concern. So she came to me and she said, I'm traveling a lot and I don't really like just wrote. She's done fashion influencing and blogging and all sorts of different stuff. She said, you really need help in your promotional products division. And I'm really creative. So
Mhm.
do you think I could do it and do a lot of it virtually? And I thought about it and I thought, you know what, that division, the person, it's not my favorite division. I'm not really super passionate about it, but it's a good division. Yeah, you know what? She could take it in and take it to a next level. And once she learns, yes, she could be. So tonight she's going to Mexico. Said, Mom, we don't want to work as hard as you do, our
No,
generation.
that is one of the big things, right? And they see how hard you worked building the business. They don't want that, which is why I
They don't
think
want
it's
that.
really important to talk to the family about the opportunities within the business and the fact that you don't have to do what I did, you know.
Right.
Anyway,
That's
believe it or
yeah.
not, Jody, we are out of time.
Oh my
That went
gosh, that
so
was quick.
fast, so fast. And I do like to wrap up with to give your on three tips that you would give to a family business, a business owner, a woman in business. What are the three tips that you would give them if they were listening to say, hey, what is the three tips in being in business?
Off the top of my head, I would say love what you do. And if you don't love what you do, don't do it. That would be the
Love
first
that.
one.
Yeah.
Because then it's not work, right? Like people say,
Yeah.
do you work so hard? I said, no, I don't. I just do what I like to do every day.
Yeah.
Um, be grateful. Be grateful and celebrate everything. Celebrate the people in your life, celebrate everything that happens, and especially now with the world it is, the way it is. And um, your reputation is absolutely everything. I mean, I don't fill out a credit application ever because people know if Jody comes in and buys $1 million worth of product, we don't even have to think. We know that she's going to pay us. And that's because I haven't made decisions I could have made that would have been very lucrative because they weren't the right decisions. So I think I
Mm.
always talk about your reputation is absolutely everything. So those would be three things off the top of my head.
I love that. Great advice. Well, anyway, thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I can't believe it's already gone.
I know. Take care.
Bye now.
If you like this episode, subscribe to the Business of Family podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can also find Blue Roots on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On the next show, I'll be back with another amazing guest who will inspire you with their family business insights. Until then, take care and keep it in the family. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, tax, investment, or insurance advice. Before acting on any advice, please contact your personal or company advisors.